Okay, so listeners, we all know about those unexpected sources, right? Those like hidden gems of knowledge that completely shift your perspective. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. It's amazing how a seemingly lighthearted thing can get you thinking about some serious global issues.
Totally. And that's what today's deep dive is all about.
Yeah.
We're checking out Trendline, which for anyone who doesn't know is this podcast known for its, witty takes on global affairs. And their latest episode had us both like, wait a minute, what's going on in Sri Lanka?
It is interesting how Sri Lanka often kind of flies under the radar on the world stage, but they're really walking this incredible tightrope, balancing internal challenges with this real ambition for global impact.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today. So Trendline touches on Sri Lanka's presence at the recent UN Summit of the Future, and it got us thinking, what does it actually mean for a nation, especially one grappling with its own internal issues, to step onto that kind of global stage?
And it's not just about being present, it's about actively shaping the agenda. The UN summit brought together world leaders to address, some of the biggest challenges facing humanity, right? And for a nation like Sri Lanka, this summit represents a chance to not just catch up, but to maybe even leapfrog ahead in some areas.
Okay, I see what you mean. So they specifically highlighted Sri Lanka's focus on bridging the digital divide. I feel like we hear that phrase a lot, but what does that actually look like in a practical sense?
Right. It's more than just, let's get everyone internet access. It's about recognizing that in our increasingly digital world, being connected is essential for everything. Education, healthcare, even just participating in the global economy. It all hinges on having access to technology and the skills to use it.
So for Sri Lanka, this isn't just about catching up with the rest of the world. It's about strategically positioning themselves in a world that's rapidly evolving.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is that Trendline suggests that by investing in things like digital infrastructure, Sri Lanka could actually leverage their current economic challenges into an opportunity to become a leader, in the digital sphere.
Wow, okay. So they're tackling these internal issues while also trying to make a splash on the world stage. It's kind of like they're trying to run before they can walk.
Yeah, and that's what makes it so compelling, right? Can Sri Lanka really pull this off? Can they overcome their internal struggles and actually become a global player? What are the risks involved in such a bold move?
Well, speaking of bold moves, as Trendline dives into these digital ambitions, they drop this bombshell, out of nowhere. Sri Lanka has a new president. Talk about a plot twist. It's like, boom, new president drops right as Sri Lanka is stepping onto this whole world stage. Makes you wonder, how's that going to shake things up, right?
Right. It really makes you think, how will this new leadership play into this whole balancing act they've got going on? And to really understand that, we kind of got to rewind a bit back to 2022. Remember how Trendline put it? Not a fun year.
Yeah, they did not sugarcoat that at all. I mean, sky-high inflation, shortages on basic goods. It was, not pretty.
It was a mess, a total economic whirlwind that really shook Sri Lanka. So this new president, he's not just, stepping into a role, he's stepping into the fallout of this whole crisis.
And it sounds like from what Trendline was saying, his whole anti-corruption platform, that really resonated with people. It's like they were looking for a change, someone to kind of right the ship,
Definitely a breath of fresh air is what they were hoping for, I'd imagine. And here's where things get even more interesting. Remember those economic challenges? Specifically that whole thing with the IMF bailout. Well, that's all tied to Sri Lanka restructuring its massive debt.
Okay, so there's a connection there. But how does this new president, with his focus on cleaning up corruption, play into something as big as national debt?
It all boils down to trust. Basically, for those international lenders like the IMF to get on board with the bailout, they need to see that commitment to transparency, to responsible governance. It's like, if this new president can really tackle corruption, it shows the world that Sri Lanka is serious about getting its act together financially.
So cleaning up corruption at home is their ticket to managing this debt on the international stage.
Exactly. And here's another layer to this whole thing. A big chunk of Sri Lanka's debt, it's owed to China, which, throws a whole other geopolitical wrench into the mix.
Well, see, I did not realize it was so intertwined with these global power dynamics. It's not just about economics. It's about navigating these really complex relationships with countries like China, while also trying to, secure a financial lifeline. This is intense.
It really is. They're juggling flaming torches on a tightrope, and the whole world is watching. One misstep and...
It's like they're rebuilding his house of cards, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, they're using it to, play poker. with some pretty high stakes.
And the whole world's watching them play. Trendline actually had a great way of putting it. They said Sri Lanka is basically trying to, like, fix things at home while also making new friends at school. Which, I mean, that pretty much sums up the pressure they're under, right?
Yeah, I get that. Okay, so let's break down the analogy a bit. When we talk about those things at home, it's more than just the economic stuff, right?
Oh, for sure. It's definitely way more than just the economy. We're talking about restoring faith in the government, tackling corruption and addressing all those underlying economic problems that led to that whole 2022 crisis we talked about earlier.
Right, right. And what about those new friends at school? It's got to be more than just, typical diplomatic stuff, right?
Exactly. This whole digital divide thing we keep coming back to, that's a big part of it. Sri Lanka's really trying to position themselves as a leader in the digital space, which isn't just about catching up. It's about attracting investment, fostering innovation, all that. They want to forge partnerships that could completely change their global standing.
So there's this tension between dealing with those internal pressures while also making these bold moves on the world stage, right? It's a bit of a tightrope walk.
Absolutely, and that's what makes this whole story so interesting. It challenges that old way of thinking about how countries make their mark on the world stage. Like, can a country with these kinds of internal issues really become a major player? Or does that ambition, that drive to prove themselves, actually help them overcome those obstacles?
It's a really good question. And it makes me wonder, how does this all affect us? I mean, we're kind of watching this all unfold, right?
Well, it's a reminder that it's not just the big global superpowers calling all the shots anymore. It's countries like Sri Lanka forging their own path, making their own rules, and maybe even changing the game in the process.
It's like they're telling the rest of the world, don't count us out just because we're facing some challenges. We're here to stay, and we're making moves.
Exactly, and whether they succeed or not, it's going to have ripple effects. Sri Lanka's story right now, it's a case study in resilience, ambition, and how unpredictable geopolitics can be.
Well, it definitely sounds like we're watching something really unique play out. Keep an eye on Sri Lanka, listeners, because this story is far from over. And for more deep dives into fascinating global issues, don't forget to subscribe to our show wherever you get your podcasts.